The organ's deep notes reverberated through the Washington National Cathedral as I stood at the altar, my hands trembling against the ivory silk of my wedding dress. 200 faces stared back at me. Friends, family, colleagues, all waiting for the moment I would become Mrs. Nathaniel Reed. The late morning sun streamed through the towering stained glass windows, casting rainbow-colored shadows across the marble floor. But my heart wasn't racing with joy. It was hammering with a terrible, crushing knowledge that threatened to split me in two. How long had they been lying to me? Behind the sea of expectant faces, I could see my mother in the front pew. Her emerald dress was perfectly coordinated with the floral arrangements she had chosen. Her smile was radiant. She looked like the very picture of maternal pride. 24 hours ago, I would have believed that smile. 24 hours ago, I still lived in a world where mothers protected their daughters and love meant something sacred. Nathaniel squeezed my hand. His blue eyes, the color of a clear summer sky, were warm with what I had once believed was devotion. "You ready for this, Celeste?" he whispered, his voice carrying that familiar confidence that had first drawn me to him 3 years ago. I looked into his face. The sharp jawline I'd traced with my fingers 1,000 times, the mouth that had promised me forever. And I felt my world crystallize into perfect, terrible clarity. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "More ready than you know." 3 months earlier, I had been blissfully, foolishly happy. My name is Celeste Marin Darren, and at 28, I believed I had everything figured out. I was the daughter my parents had always dreamed of. I had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with a degree in literature, worked as a senior editor at Meridian Publishing, and had just gotten engaged to Nathaniel Reed, the golden boy of our community. Our engagement had been a fairy tale. Nathaniel, 31 and devastatingly handsome, was the son of Judge Harrison Reed and philanthropist Victoria Reed. He worked as a corporate attorney at one of D.C.'s most prestigious firms, drove a gleaming black BMW, and had proposed to me at the Kennedy Center during the intermission of Swan Lake, my favorite ballet. He had knelt on one knee right there in the grand foyer, the crystal chandeliers sparkling above us like a frozen firework display. The entire room had erupted in applause as I tearfully said yes. "You're going to have such a beautiful life together." My mother, Diana, had gushed later that night, admiring the 2-carat diamond ring that caught the light like captured starfire. We were sitting in my parents' stately colonial home in McLean, Virginia, celebrating with champagne. The house, always immaculate, seemed to glow with a special warmth that evening. "The Reeds are such a prominent family," she continued, her eyes shining. "You've done well, sweetheart." I should have caught the way she said it. Not, "You'll be so happy," or "He's perfect for you," but "You've done well," as if I'd completed some sort of transaction rather than found my soulmate. But I was too lost in the champagne bubbles and the weight of the diamond on my finger to notice. My father, Pastor William Darren, had been more reserved but equally pleased. He had built his reputation on family values and traditional morals. Seeing his only daughter marry into such a respected family felt like a blessing on everything he'd preached for 30 years. He was a good man. My father, quiet man, whose love was a steady, constant presence in my life, like the warmth from a hearth. "Nathaniel is a good man," Dad had said, pulling me into one of his warm, enveloping hugs after our guests had left. The familiar scent of old books and peppermint tea clung to his sweater. "I can see how much he loves you, Celeste. And more importantly, I can see how much you love him." The word love, the word that would later taste like poison on my tongue. The wedding planning had consumed the next 2 months. My mother threw herself into the preparations with an intensity that both touched and exhausted me. She insisted on handling every detail: the flowers, the catering, the music, even my dress-fitting appointments. This is every mother's dream, she would say, flipping through glossy pages of bridal magazines and making endless phone calls. She was in her element, planning her daughter's perfect wedding. I was grateful for her involvement, even when she occasionally overruled my preferences with a gentle but firm hand. When I suggested wildflowers for the bouquets, something wild and natural, like Mesh insisted on classic white roses and peonies. They're more elegant, darling, more timeless. When I said I wanted a simple string quartet, she booked a full orchestra. It's the National Cathedral, Celeste. It requires something grand. When I mentioned wanting to write my own vows, she convinced me that the traditional vows were more meaningful, more sacred. They've been spoken by millions of couples for centuries. There's a power in that tradition, don't you think? Trust me, darling, she would say with that radiant smile I'd inherited. Mother knows best. And I, being the good daughter I had always been, trusted her. I let her shape my wedding into her vision of perfection, believing it was an act of love. Nathaniel seemed amused by our family dynamics. He would often drop by my parents' house unannounced, charming my father with stories from his law firm and complimenting my mother's cooking with a sincerity that made her blush. He and my mother, Diana, would spend long minutes in the kitchen together while I finished up work calls or graded manuscripts in the study. Their laughter would drift through our colonial-style house like music. It was a pleasant, harmonious sound that I mistook for happiness. Your mother is remarkable, he told me one evening as we walked through Meridian Hill Park, the same path where he'd first asked me to be his girlfriend. The city lights twinkled below us, a carpet of diamonds. She's so devoted to making sure everything is perfect for us. She's always been like that, I replied, squeezing his hand. The cool night air felt crisp on my skin. When I was little, she'd spend weeks preparing for my birthday parties. Every detail had to be flawless. And they always were. I'm sure, he said. He stopped walking and turned to face me. His hands framed my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. His touch was electric. Just like you're perfect. I should have wondered why he spent so much time talking about my mother. I should have questioned the way his eyes would linger on her when she laughed, or how he always seemed to know exactly what kind of wine to bring that would make her light up with delight. He'd bring over a specific bottle of Sancerre, and she'd clap her hands together. Oh, Nathaniel, how did you know this is my absolute favorite? I just thought he was exceptionally thoughtful. An attentive future son-in-law. I was so in love. In love? I was beginning to learn. Makes us spectacularly blind. It drapes a beautiful veil over the world, hiding all the ugly, jagged edges. The first crack in my perfect world appeared 3 weeks before the wedding. It was a Wednesday evening, and I had stopped by my parents' house after work to finalize the seating arrangements. My arms were full of RSVP cards, and my laptop bag felt heavy on my shoulder. The house was unusually quiet when I let myself in through the front door. Mom? Dad? I called, setting my bags down in the foyer. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm. In the kitchen, sweetheart, came my mother's voice. But there was something different about it. Breathless, almost flustered. I found her standing at the sink, her back to me, washing dishes that looked suspiciously clean. Her dark hair, usually styled in a perfect chignon, was slightly mussed, and when she turned around, her cheeks were flushed a deep pink. Her usual poise was gone, replaced by a jittery energy. Oh, Celeste, honey, I didn't expect you so early. It's 6:30, I said, checking my watch. Same time I always come on Wednesdays. Of course, she said, drying her hands on a dish towel, carefully avoiding my eyes. Your father's at a church board meeting. He won't be back for a while. Something felt off, but I couldn't place what it was. The kitchen smelled different. Not like my mother's usual vanilla and cinnamon candles, but like something else. Something masculine and expensive. Cologne I didn't recognize, but it was sharp and citrusy, like something Nathaniel would wear. Was someone here? I asked, settling at the kitchen island with the RSVP cards. I started sorting them into yes and no piles. What? Oh, no. Just me, she said quickly, turning back to the sink and starting to scrub a plate that was already sparkling. I almost let it go. I almost dismissed the strange feeling as my own pre-wedding jitters. But then I noticed something on the granite countertop, next to the coffee maker. A single coffee mug from our good china set, the one we only use for special guests. It was still warm to the touch. Mom, whose mug is this? Her shoulders tensed. I saw the muscles in her back tighten beneath her silk blouse. Mine, of course. You only drink tea in the evening, I stated. It was a known fact. A running family joke. My mother believed coffee after 3 p.m. was a cardinal sin. I was feeling tired. She stammered. Needed the caffeine. The lie sat between us like a live wire. My mother had never been a good liar. Her tells were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, the way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice, the compulsive need to busy her hands with a task, like washing already clean dishes. But I loved her, and I trusted her. So, I chose to believe her. It was easier to believe the lie than to confront the unsettling truth that was trying to surface. Okay, I said simply, turning my attention back to the cards. Let's figure out where to put Uncle Robert so he doesn't argue with Aunt Carol about politics. The evening proceeded normally after that. But something had shifted. The air was thick with unspoken words. I caught my mother glancing at her phone constantly, her fingers tapping anxiously against the counter. When Nathaniel texted me around 8 p.m. to say he was working late and would see me tomorrow, I noticed the way her entire body seemed to relax. The tension visibly drained from her shoulders, and she finally sat down with me at the table, her smile returning, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The house felt quiet again, but it was no longer a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a held breath. The second crack came a week later. Nathaniel had been distant since that Wednesday, claiming work was overwhelming him as they closed a big merger. Our usual Thursday night dinners, a ritual we'd honored since our second date, had been canceled twice. He'd also missed our cake tasting appointment with the bakery, sending a hurried text filled with apologies and legal jargon I didn't understand. I tried to be supportive. I knew his job was demanding, and the pressure on him was immense, especially with the wedding approaching. But a small, cold knot of unease was tightening in my stomach. That evening, I decided to surprise him. I'd bring over his favorite Thai food and we could have a quiet night away from the wedding stress and work deadlines. I called his office at 7, but his secretary, a kind woman named Martha, said he'd left early, around 4. He said he was feeling under the weather. She'd explained. My unease sharpened into genuine worry. I drove to his apartment in Georgetown, a sleek high-rise with a doorman who knew me by name. Evening. Darren, Charles said with a friendly nod as he opened the door for me. Hi, Charles. Is Nate home? His car is in the garage. He came in a few hours ago. He confirmed. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. The quiet hum of the machinery seemed to amplify the frantic beating of my heart. I knocked on his door. A heavy oak panel that always made me feel like I was entering a fortress. No answer. I knocked again. Louder this time. Nate? It's me. Silence. I used my key. The lock clicked open with an unnervingly loud sound in the silent hallway. Nathaniel, are you okay? The apartment was dark. The only light came from the floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a glittering panorama of the city lights. His car was in the garage, but the space felt empty, unnaturally still. I called his name again, my voice sounding small in the vast living room. We had already begun planning how we would redecorate after our honeymoon, picking out paint swatches and arguing playfully over furniture. Now, the space felt alien. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw a wine glass on the coffee table. Just one, but it wasn't his usual whiskey tumbler. It was a delicate stem glass, and it had a smudge of lipstick on the rim, a deep, plummy shade, a shade I didn't recognize, a shade I never wore. I favored soft pinks and nudes. My mother, however, loved bold, dark colors. The thought flickered through my mind and was just as quickly dismissed. It was too monstrous to contemplate. It had to be a colleague, I told myself. A friend. Nathaniel? I walked toward his bedroom. The door was closed. I tried the handle. It was locked. That was strange. He never locked his bedroom door. Not with me. I'm in here. His voice came through the wood, muffled and odd. It lacked its usual resonance. I'm not feeling well. Celeste. Food poisoning, I think. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. Of course. He was sick. That explained everything. Oh, honey, let me in. Let me take care of you. No, he said. His voice strained. It's bad. I don't want you to catch anything. It's really contagious. Contagious food poisoning? I wasn't a doctor, but that didn't sound right. Still, I didn't push. Are you sure? I can get you some ginger ale. Some crackers. I'll be fine. I just need to sleep it off. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that locked door. A barrier of solid wood between us. In our 3 years together, Nathaniel had never once refused to let me help him when he was sick. He was the type of man who wanted to be babied when he had so much as a headache. He loved the attention, the fussing. But again, I chose trust over suspicion. I forced the image of the wine glass from my mind. I manufactured a story where a female colleague had dropped by to give him some files, had a glass of wine, and left. It was a flimsy narrative, but it was better than the alternative. Okay, I said to the door. Feel better. I love you. Love you, too. The words came, but they were a beat too late. They sounded like an echo, a duty rather than a declaration. I left the Thai food on his kitchen counter with a note and let myself out, the click of the lock behind me sounding like a final, definitive closing. As I walked back through the pristine lobby, Charles the doorman gave me a sympathetic look. Everything all right? Darren. He's just not feeling well, I said, forcing a smile. He nodded, but his eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Kitty, perhaps? It was a look I would come to understand all too well. The truth, I've learned, has a way of revealing itself. It's not always a sudden explosion. Sometimes it's like water seeping into the foundation of a house. A slow, quiet, and relentless process. You can ignore the damp spots on the walls for a while. You can paint over the cracks. But eventually, the whole structure becomes unstable. Eventually, the house collapses. My house came down 2 days before my wedding. I was at the office, trying to focus on a manuscript about medieval poetry, but the words kept blurring together. My mind was a tangled mess of seating charts, floral arrangements, and a persistent, low-grade anxiety I couldn't shake. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed my mother's number. Her picture, taken last Christmas, smiled up at me. Celeste, darling, I need a favor, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. Of course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, I left some of the wedding programs in my car, and I'm having a long lunch with Mrs. Chin from the flower committee. You know how she likes to talk. Could you possibly swing by the house and grab them for me? They're in my Mercedes, in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. I need to drop them at the church later. Sure. No problem, I said. It was on my way home anyway. A simple errand. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes through the thick of D.C. traffic. I used my key to get through the front gate and parked behind my mother's silver Mercedes. The neighborhood was quiet, basking in the golden light of the late afternoon. I opened the passenger door of her car, the scent of her signature gardenia perfume hitting me immediately. I saw the manila envelope right away, just as she'd said. But as I reached for it, something else caught my eye. A small, black leather notebook had slipped down between the passenger seat and the center console. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that my name was written on the cover in my mother's elegant, familiar handwriting, Celeste. Curiosity, a cold and insistent prickle, went through me. Why would she have a notebook with my name on it? Maybe it was a list of wedding to-dos or thoughts for a mother of the bride's speech. I pulled it out. It was a Moleskine journal, the kind I use for my own writing. My hand shook as I opened it. The first page was dated 3 months ago, just after my engagement announcement. Nathaniel Reed is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. Instead, I settled for William and his middle-class ministry, for a life of bake sales and quiet dignity. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once. The notebook slipped from my fingers, falling onto the plush floor mat with a soft thud. I sat in the driver's seat of my mother's car, the door still open, staring at her handwriting as the world tilted sideways. The ticking of the car's clock was deafening in the sudden silence. The air became thick, hard to breathe. A car drove past on the street, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal life was happening all around me, while my entire world was crumbling into dust. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook and forced myself to continue reading. He looks at me the way William used to, before the years and the routine wore him down. When Nathaniel compliments my dress or my cooking, I remember what it felt like to be desired, to be seen not just as a wife or a mother, but as a woman. Today, he stayed after Celeste left for work. We talked for hours about literature and travel. He said I was wasted on this small-town life. He's right. I know this is wrong. I know what it would do to Celeste if she found out. My sweet, trusting girl. But when was the last time anyone chose me? Really chose me? Not out of duty or convention, but out of pure want? Page after page, entry after entry. My mother's careful, looping handwriting documenting the slow, deliberate seduction of my fiancé. He kissed me today, in the kitchen, right after Celeste left for her book club. God help me. I kissed him back. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. We made love in his apartment while Celeste was at her bridal shower. He said I was more passionate than any woman he'd ever been with. I felt alive again, young again. Nathaniel says after the wedding, we'll find a way to be together. He says marrying Celeste is just what's expected of him, what his family wants. A business arrangement, he called it. But he says his heart belongs to me now. The final entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding. He's coming over while William is at his men's group meeting. Our last time together before Celeste becomes his wife. After that, we'll have to be more careful. But we've come too far to stop now. This is my chance. My last chance for happiness. I closed the notebook. I sat in perfect, horrifying stillness. The question that had been a whisper in the back of my mind for weeks now echoed like a scream in the silent car. How long? How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? Every shared glance I'd misinterpreted. Every inside joke I wasn't privy to. Every compliment Nathaniel had paid my mother, all replayed in my mind, now cast in a sickening new light. I thought about my father. planning to walk me down the aisle tomorrow. So proud and blissfully unaware that his wife was sleeping with the groom. I thought about the wedding dress my mother had so carefully chosen for me, the traditional vow she had insisted upon. It was all part of the set. I was a prop in their sordid play. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and betrayal. I didn't sob or scream. I cried silently, the tears running in dark streams down my cheeks, smudging the makeup I'd so carefully applied that morning. I cried until my chest ached and my throat was raw. I cried until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me. Now, I would choose myself over them. I didn't go home that night. I didn't go back to my neat little apartment in Arlington, with its bookshelves filled with classics and its kitchen stocked with wedding gifts we hadn't even unwrapped yet. The thought of sleeping in the bed I had shared with Nathaniel, of seeing his picture on my nightstand, was physically repulsive. Instead, I drove downtown, my movements stiff and robotic, my mind a blizzard of rage and pain. I checked into the Willard Intercontinental Hotel, a historic landmark just a stone's throw from the White House. Paid in cash, a thick wad of bills I'd withdrawn for honeymoon spending money. I gave the front desk clerk a false name, Sarah Peterson, and a fabricated story. I'm surprising my husband for our anniversary, I said, the lie coming with a shocking, newfound ease. Apparently, I was learning to be as good at deception as my mother and fiancé. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, smiled warmly. How romantic. I hope you both have a wonderful stay. The lie felt like a bitter acid in my mouth, but it served its purpose. It gave me a cloak of anonymity, a space where I could fall apart and then piece myself back together into something new, something sharp. In the opulent hotel room, I spread everything out on the king-sized bed like a detective organizing evidence for a trial. There was my mother's journal, its black cover looking like a tombstone. There were the screenshots I'd taken of Nathaniel's recent credit card statements from our joint account, which we'd set up for wedding expenses. The charges painted a vivid picture. A $300 dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant on a night he told me he was eating a sad desk salad. A receipt from a high-end liquor store for a case of Sancerre, my mother's favorite wine. A charge for a room at the Hay Adams, a luxury hotel. On the same afternoon I was at my final dress fitting. Then there was the growing list I was compiling on a sheet of hotel stationery, a list of all the signs I had missed, all the red flags I had painted white, the expensive cologne smell in my parents' kitchen, the lipstick on the wine glass in Nathaniel's apartment, his sudden, encyclopedic knowledge of my mother's favorite things, the way they had both been so insistent about using traditional wedding vows, probably because they knew I might say something in my own vows, something honest and real, that would expose their guilt. Each memory was a small cut, and now I was bleeding from 1,000 of them. I ordered room service, an overpriced plate of pasta, and a bottle of brutally expensive red wine. I sat cross-legged on the bed, eating pasta carbonara while I planned their destruction. The old Celeste, the one who existed just hours ago, would have confronted them privately. She would have cried and demanded explanations. She would have listened to their excuses, their justifications, and probably would have ended up being manipulated into some twisted form of forgiveness. The old Celeste believed in second chances and the power of love to overcome anything. But the old Celeste was dead. She had died in the driver's seat of a silver Mercedes while the suburban afternoon hummed on around her. The new Celeste understood that some betrayals are too profound for private resolution. This wasn't just about a cheating fiancé or an unfaithful mother. This was about two people who had conspired to make me complicit in my own humiliation. They had planned to stand at the altar with me, to let me make sacred vows, all while intending to continue their affair. They had stolen not just my happiness, but my dignity. They had tried to make me a fool in a story where they were the tragic, romantic heroes. They wanted to play games. Fine. I had learned from the best. My first call was to my assistant at Meridian Publishing, Jenna. She was young, fiercely competent, and loyal to a fault. Jenna. It's Celeste. I need you to do me a huge favor. And I need you to be discreet. Of course. Celeste. Is everything okay? You sound different. Everything's perfect, I said. And for the first time in days, felt true. It was the terrifying, exhilarating perfection of a storm about to break. I need you to compile a complete guest list for everyone who's coming to my wedding tomorrow. I need email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, everything you can find. Put it in a spreadsheet and send it to my personal email. Okay, sure. I can have that for you in an hour. Is this for sending out thank you notes early? Something like that. I replied. I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow. My next call was to my college roommate, Priya Sharma. She was a freelance journalist based in New York. A firecracker with a steel-trap mind and an allergy to bullshit. She was supposed to be a guest at my wedding, not a reporter. Celeste. Oh my God. Your wedding is tomorrow. Are you freaking out? I am so excited for you. Her voice crackled with energy through the phone. Priya. I said. My tone low and serious. I need a favor. And I need you to not ask any questions until tomorrow. Her voice immediately grew cautious. The party girl vanished, replaced by the journalist. Okay. What kind of favor? I need you to be at the Washington National Cathedral tomorrow. But I don't want you in a pew. I want you there with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen. And I want it documented. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of city sirens in the background. Celeste, you're scaring me. I'm not the one who should be scared, I said, a cold certainty hardening my voice. Trust me. I'm on the first train in the morning, she said without another moment's hesitation. That was Priya. Unflinching loyalty. The final call was the hardest. My hands trembled as I dialed my father's number. I knew he'd be home from his men's group meeting by now, probably sitting in his study, reading his Bible, completely unaware that his world was a house of cards. He answered on the second ring. Celeste. Sweetheart. You shouldn't be calling me. Isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding? His voice was so full of warmth, so full of love. It almost broke me. Dad, I said, and my voice cracked just slightly. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to remember that I love you. And I need you to know that none of this is your fault. The warmth in his voice chilled with concern. Honey, you're worrying me. What's wrong? Are you having second thoughts? Nothing's wrong, Dad, I said, my voice finding its strength again. For the first time in a long time, everything's finally going to be right. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel room's opulent silence for a long time. I thought about justice and revenge, and the fine line that separates the two. Revenge was about causing pain, a messy, emotional eruption. Justice was about revealing truth, about restoring a balance that had been violently disrupted. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be seeking revenge. I would be serving justice, and I would do it with a smile on my face. I woke at dawn and ordered coffee from room service. I sat by the window in my hotel bathrobe, watching the sun paint Washington, D.C. in shades of gold and pale pink. In 6 hours, I was supposed to become Mrs. Nathaniel Reed. Instead, I was about to become something much more powerful. A woman who refused to be anyone's fool. My phone, which I'd left on the nightstand, had been buzzing all morning with texts from my mother. Good morning, beautiful bride. I hope you slept well. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle today. It's going to be the most beautiful moment. The flowers are perfect. The musicians are setting up. I just confirmed with the photographer. Everything is exactly as it should be. I love you so much. Sweetheart. Today is going to be the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a knife wrapped in silk. Everything is exactly as it should be. She had no idea how right she was. 9. I took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away the last traces of the woman I used to be. When I stepped out and looked at myself in the steam-fogged bathroom mirror, I really looked at myself, maybe for the first time in months. My dark hair, so much like my mother's. My blue eyes, inherited from my father. My face, which had always been called pretty but never remarkable. Today, I would be remarkable. I drove to the cathedral slowly, taking the long way through downtown D.C. The morning was crisp and clear. A perfect autumn day. A perfect day for a wedding. The Washington National Cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like a prayer made of stone. Cars were already arriving. Early guests, vendors, family members getting ready for what they thought would be a celebration of love. I parked in the lot behind the cathedral and sat for a moment, just watching. I saw Mrs. Chin from the flower committee bustling about. I saw Mr. Rodriguez, who had been our neighbor for 20 years, helping his wife out of their car. I saw Nathaniel's law school friends laughing and adjusting their ties. All these people who cared about me, who had taken time out of their Saturday to witness what they believed would be the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved to know the truth, too. They deserved to know that the union they were about to witness was not sacred, but a sham. I gathered my wedding dress, shoes, and makeup bag, and walked into the cathedral through a side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small, stone-walled space was already a hive of activity. My matron of honor, Kathleen, was hanging up her dress. My 2 bridesmaids were setting up a coffee station and arranging a platter of pastries. Celeste. Kathleen rushed over to hug me. Oh my God. You're glowing. How are you feeling? Like today is going to change everything, I said. And it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. Kathleen laughed. Well, yeah, it's your wedding day. Where's your mother? One of the bridesmaids asked. I thought she'd be here by now. I checked my phone. No new messages from Diana since her sickeningly sweet good morning texts. I knew exactly where she was, or at least, where she had been. Last night, in my hotel room, I had used our shared family phone plan account to track Nathaniel's phone. A small, vindictive part of me had needed to know. He had spent the night at our family home in McLean, leaving at 6:30 this morning, probably to avoid being seen by neighbors or my father. One last betrayal for old time's sake. She's probably at home, getting ready, I said, my voice even. You know how she likes everything to be perfect. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt strangely calm. The ivory silk slipped over my skin like armor. When they fastened the dozens of tiny pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming into someone new, someone stronger. The dress had been my mother's choice. Of course. A traditional A-line gown with long lace sleeves, a cathedral-length train, and enough beadwork to rival a constellation. I wanted something simpler, more modern. But Diana had insisted. This dress will photograph beautifully, she'd said during the fitting. Classic elegance never goes out of style. Now I understood. She wasn't just dressing her daughter. She was staging a scene. She needed me to look perfect for the photographs that would document the union of her daughter and her lover. The thought was so grotesque it was almost laughable. Kathleen pinned my veil in place, the same fingertip-length veil my grandmother had worn. You look absolutely stunning, Celeste. Nathaniel is going to die when he sees you. I certainly hope so, I murmured, my reflection in the mirror looking back at me with cold, determined eyes. At 11:30, the photographer arrived to take pre-ceremony shots. He was a cheerful man named Julian who kept telling me to look happy and think about the honeymoon. I smiled and posed, letting him capture what he thought were images of bridal joy. In reality, they were photos of a woman preparing for war. Each click of the shutter felt like the cocking of a rifle. I smiled at the camera, but my eyes were scanning the room, noting the exits, the placement of the altar, the microphone stand. I was no longer a bride. I was a general surveying her battlefield. At 11:45, my father arrived. "Hi, beautiful girl." He stood in the doorway of the bridal room, resplendent in his formal black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. 58. Pastor William Darren was still a handsome man, tall and dignified, with the kind of genuine warmth that had made him beloved by his congregation for decades. He was also a man whose world was about to collapse. The sight of him, so proud and unsuspecting, was the one thing that threatened to shatter my composure. "You look radiant, sweetheart," he said, his eyes growing misty. "I can hardly believe my little girl is getting married." The bridesmaids and the photographer, sensing the gravity of the moment, tactfully stepped aside to give us a sliver of privacy. I took my father's hands in mine. They were strong, gentle hands. Hands that had blessed countless couples at this very altar, that had held me when I scraped my knees as a child, that had taught me how to drive and to pray and to believe in the fundamental goodness of people. "Dad," I said, my voice low and urgent, "I need to tell you something before we walk down that aisle." "Of course. Honey. What is it? Wedding day jitters?" He gave my hands a reassuring squeeze. "It's normal. Your mother was a nervous wreck on our wedding day." The mention of my mother was like a splash of ice water. Solidified my resolve. I reached into my bridal baga small, satin clutch that barely held my phone and a tube of lipstick and pulled out the black leather journal. I placed it in his hands. "I found this in Mom's car yesterday," I said simply. He looked confused as he took it. He glanced at my name on the cover, then opened it to the first page. I watched his face change as he began to read. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pasty, grayish color. His lips parted slightly. His hands, the same strong hands that held mine just a moment ago, began to tremble violently. The journal shook. "Celeste." His voice was barely a whisper, a dry, rasping sound. "This can't be. This is some kind of sick joke. Your mother. She would never." "Read the dates, Dad," I urged him gently, my heart aching for his pain. "Read all of it. Read the last entry." He sank into a nearby velvet armchair, his legs seemingly unable to support him any longer. He held the journal as if it were a venomous snake, his eyes scanning page after page of his wife's betrayal. The story unfolded before him in her elegant, treacherous handwriting. I knelt beside him on the cold stone floor, my expensive wedding dress pooling around us like spilled cream. I didn't say a word. I just waited. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my father's ragged breathing and the rustle of turning pages. "How long?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. He didn't look up from the book. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday afternoon." "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "I'm so sorry." He looked up at me then. This man who had built his entire ministry, his entire life, on the sanctity of marriage and family, and I saw something break behind his eyes. It was more than just heartbreak. It was the shattering of a fundamental belief, the collapse of the very foundation of his world. "What are we going to do?" he whispered, looking around the room as if he were a stranger in his own life. "We're going to walk down that aisle," I said, my voice firm, infused with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "We're going to stand at that altar." And we're going to let everyone see exactly who Diana Darren and Nathaniel Reed really are. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. Celeste. No. Think about what you're saying. The scandal. The humiliation. For our family. The humiliation isn't ours to carry, Dad, I said, my gaze unwavering. It's theirs. They built this prison of lies. I'm just going to open the door and let the light in. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war raging within him. 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly, behind closed doors, wrestled with the raw, undeniable truth in his hands. He was a man of the cloth, a man who preached forgiveness. But what he was reading was unforgivable. There are 200 people out there, he said, his voice weak. Our friends, our family. 200 people who love us and who deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. I countered. They came here to witness a union based on love and trust. What's happening today is the opposite of that. It's a mockery of everything you believe in. Everything you've taught me to believe in. Your reputation. My ministry. My reputation will be that of a woman who refused to be made a fool of. I said fiercely. A woman who chose dignity over silence. And your ministry will be stronger for it. Because it will be based on truth. Not hypocrisy. A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. 5 minutes. Everyone. The wedding coordinator called cheerfully from the other side. My father stood up slowly. His legs unsteady. For a moment, I was afraid he might collapse right there. But then he did something that made my heart swell with a fierce, protective love. He straightened his shoulders. He smoothed the front of his tuxedo. He looked down at me. And in his devastated eyes, I saw a flicker of something new pride. You're braver than I ever was, Celeste, he said quietly. I learned from the best, I replied, squeezing his hand. He offered me his arm, a gesture we had practiced at the rehearsal dinner just 2 nights ago. Then, it had felt traditional and sweet. Now, it felt like 2 soldiers preparing to go into battle. Together, we walked toward the sanctuary doors. Through the tall, leaded glass panels, I could see the cathedral was filled to capacity. The afternoon light illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. The altar was a breathtaking cascade of white roses and peonies, just as my mother had wanted. The orchestra she had booked was playing Pachelbel's canon, the soaring melody filling the sacred space. And there, at the altar, stood Nathaniel. He was in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney and devoted bridegroom. His best man and groomsmen flanked him, all of them smiling in anticipation. In the front row, my mother sat, radiant in her emerald dress, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. She looked exactly as a mother of the bride should look, proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. The picture of maternal devotion. What incredible actors they both are, I thought with a cold, detached admiration. They should have been on Broadway instead of in my life. The wedding coordinator, a woman with a headset and a clipboard, gave us a final, beaming smile and opened the heavy oak doors. The processional music began. My bridesmaids, looking beautiful in their soft pink dresses, started their slow walk down the aisle, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar. Then, the music swelled into the triumphant notes of the bridal march. As one, every person in that cathedral rose to their feet and turned to look at us. Ready? Dad whispered, his arm linked tightly with mine. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. Ready. We stepped into the sanctuary. I felt 200 pairs of eyes on us. Cameras flashed from the back. People smiled and whispered to each other about how beautiful I looked, about what a perfect couple we made. Nathaniel's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what looked, to the untrained eye, like genuine love. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes again. A perfect performance of sentimental joy. As we walked down that long, marbled aisle, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This was my stage now. They had written the play, but I was about to rewrite the ending. We reached the altar. My father placed my hand in Nathaniel's, the traditional gesture of one man giving his daughter to another. In that moment, it felt like he was handing me a weapon. Dad gave my hand a final squeezy, a signal of solidarity, before taking his seat next to his wife. The officiant, Pastor Jenkins, a kind-faced colleague of my father's, began, "Dearly beloved." His voice carried easily through the cathedral's state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God to witness and bless the union of Nathaniel William Reed and Celeste Marin Darren in holy matrimony." I let him speak, following along with the traditional ceremony, my mind clear and focused. I was waiting for my moment. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, a gesture of reassurance. I squeezed back, a gesture of my own. In the front row, my mother watched with glowing pride. They had no idea what was coming. They were sailing on a calm sea, oblivious to the tsunami gathering just beneath the surface. Pastor Jenkins continued, his voice a soothing, familiar baritone that had presided over countless baptisms, weddings, and funerals in our community. Marriage is a sacred and honorable estate, instituted by God, and therefore is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. How appropriate, thought, a bitter smile almost touching my lips. Let's talk about reverence. Let's talk about God's purposes. Nathaniel leaned in slightly, whispering so only I could hear. "You look breathtaking, Celeste." His breath smelled faintly of mint and self-satisfaction. I simply nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on Pastor Jenkins, my expression serene. The mask of the happy bride was still firmly in place. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to walk willingly to the edge of the cliff before I gave them the final push. Into this holy union, Nathaniel and Celeste now come to be joined, the pastor announced. Therefore, if there is anyone present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was it. This was the dramatic moment from the movies, the moment I could have spoken up and ended it all right then and there. A ripple of rustling and coughing passed through the congregation, as it always did during this part of the ceremony, but no one spoke, and neither did I. That would have been too easy, too predictable. My plan was more intricate, more devastating. I wanted them to get all the way to their vows. I wanted them to lie one last time, not just to me, but to God and to 200 witnesses. I remained silent, my hands clasped in front of me. Pastor Jenkins, seeing no objections, smiled and proceeded. He spoke of love, of fidelity, of the journey of partnership. Every word was a hot coal against my skin. I could feel Nathaniel's confidence growing beside me. He thought we had passed the point of no return. He thought he had one. We turned to face each other for the vows. I looked into Nathaniel's handsome face, the face I had once thought I would wake up to for the rest of my life. I saw nothing behind his blue eyes but a reflection of my own wedding dress. "Nathaniel," Pastor Jenkins said, his voice resonating with warmth, "do you take Celeste to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, forsaking all others, and to be faithful to her alone, so long as you both shall live?" Nathaniel looked deeply into my eyes, his voice strong and clear, ringing through the cathedral. "I do. Forsaking all others." The lie was so brazen, so audacious, it almost made me laugh out loud. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. He didn't even flinch. Beside me, I could hear a soft sniffle from the front pew. It was my mother, wiping away another tear of manufactured joy. Then, it was my turn. Celeste, Pastor Jenkins said, turning his gentle gaze to me. Do you take Nathaniel to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, forsaking all others, and to be faithful to him alone, so long as you both shall live? This was my moment, the culmination of 48 hours of grief, rage, and cold, hard planning, the moment to say I do and become complicit in my own deception for the rest of my life, or the moment to burn their world to the ground with the truth. I looked out at the congregation. I saw all these faces, filled with expectation and joy. I saw Nathaniel's parents, Judge and Mrs. Reed, beaming with pride in the front row. I looked at my father, his face pale and grim, but his eyes were fixed on me, giving me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. And I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with that ridiculous lace handkerchief, the picture of theatrical emotion. I took a small step forward, closer to the microphone. I took a deep breath. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect sound system, I have something to say first. The cathedral fell into a perfect, sudden silence. The orchestra, which had been playing softly in the background, trailed off into a confused hush. 200 heads tilted in unison. Nathaniel's hand, which had been resting on my arm, tightened. His smile faltered just slightly. Celeste? He whispered, a hint of confusion in his voice. Pastor Jenkins looked taken aback. Celeste? Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said, my voice gaining strength. I turned to face the congregation, making eye contact with as many people as I could. 200 faces stared back at me, confusion quickly replacing celebration in their expressions. I just realized that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest with all of you. Nathaniel's grip on my arm was almost painful now. Celeste, what are you doing? He hissed, his eyes darting around nervously. I pulled my hand free and stepped slightly away from him, claiming the space around the microphone as my own. In the front row, my mother had gone very still. Her handkerchief was forgotten in her lap, her hands clenched into fists. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I began, my voice steady and clear, like a news anchor reporting a national tragedy. It means the world to me that you would take time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after. Murmurs began to ripple through the congregation. A low, uncertain buzz. I could see Priya in the back, near a stone pillar, her camera discreetly positioned. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave me a slight nod. But I've learned recently, I continued, pitching my voice to carry to the last pew, that happy endings are built on truth, not on beautiful, elaborate lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues. Celeste. Nathaniel reached for me, a desperate look on his face. This isn't the time or the place. I stepped further away, putting the microphone stand between us. Oh, I think this is the perfect time and place, I said, my voice hardening. Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé, Nathaniel Reed, and my own mother, Diana Darren, have been having an affair for the past 3 months. The words hit the cathedral like a bomb. A collective gasp echoed off the high, vaulted stone ceilings. Someone in the middle pews dropped their program, the sound of paper hitting marble unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. In the front row, I watched the color drain from Judge Reed's face as he turned to stare at his son in horror. Victoria Reed's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. I found my mother's journal. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, each truth I unleashed. detailing their entire relationship. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me. My father. And all of you. My mother shot up from her seat, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. Celeste, stop this nonsense at once. You're hysterical. Sit down. Diana. The sharp, authoritative command came from my father. He had also risen from his seat. His voice, the voice that had delivered hundreds of sermons from a pulpit, carried the undeniable authority of 30 years of ministry. It was a voice no one in that church had ever disobeyed. My mother sank back into her pew as if she'd been struck, her face crumbling. Nathaniel was frantically trying to salvage the unsalvageable. Everyone. Please. There's been some kind of terrible misunderstanding. Celeste is just. She's under a lot of stress. Is it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house? I asked, my voice ringing with accusation, loud enough for everyone to hear. While my father was at his men's group meeting. Planning your bachelor party? A meeting you were supposed to attend? The cathedral erupted in a fresh wave of shocked whispers and gasps. Nathaniel's face went white. He looked like a cornered animal. Is it a misunderstanding? I pressed on, my voice dripping with ice. That you've been using our joint credit card to buy my mother expensive gifts? Like cases of the Sancerre she loves so much? The same Sancerre she specifically mentioned in her journal entries about your affair? Judge Reed was on his feet now, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He took a step toward the altar. Nathaniel. He boomed, his voice that of a man used to commanding a courtroom. Tell me this isn't true. Nathaniel looked around the cathedral wildly, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire life crumbling in real time. He looked from his furious father to my heartbroken one, from his horrified mother to my shattered one. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not remorse, but pure, unadulterated hatred for being caught. I can explain. He stammered, his usual smooth confidence completely gone. Oh, please do explain, I said, my voice dripping with a false sweetness that was sharper than any knife. Explain to your father. Explain to your colleagues from the firm. Explain to everyone here who believed you were a man of honor how you seduced your fiancé's mother. And please, be sure to explain how you plan to marry me today, while continuing your affair with her. We're all waiting. The silence that followed was deafening. It was absolute. Every single person in that magnificent, sun-drenched cathedral was staring at Nathaniel Reed, waiting for his explanation. And he had nothing. No smooth attorney arguments. No charming deflections. No clever lies. Just the ugly, naked truth, finally exposed to the light. In the front row, my mother was weeping. Not the delicate, cinematic tears of a proud mother, but harsh, ugly, gasping sobs of a woman whose life had just imploded. The carefully constructed facade of Diana Darren, the perfect pastor's wife, the elegant matriarch, had been sledgehammered into dust. Celeste, she choked out, her voice thick and unrecognizable. Please, you don't understand. I turned my full attention to her, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the thick, shocked silence of the cathedral. Oh, I understand perfectly. Mother, I said, the word mother feeling foreign and sharp on my tongue. I understand that you looked at my happiness, my future, and my trust in you, and you decided it was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again. I understand that you looked at my fiancé and decided you deserved him more than I did. That's not true. I never meant. She started, her words dissolving into another wrenching sob. You never meant to get caught. I finished for her. The truth of it hung in the air, brutal and undeniable. My mother crumpled back into her seat, her beautiful emerald dress now looking gaudy and desperate instead of elegant. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Beside her, my father didn't move. He didn't reach out to comfort her. He just sat there, straight and tall, a statue carved from grief and righteousness. I looked out at the congregation again, at our friends, our family, our colleagues, people who had watched me grow up, who had celebrated my achievements and offered comfort in my sorrows. Their faces showed a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, confusion, sympathy, and, on some faces, a growing, righteous anger on my behalf. But not one of them, not a single one, looked at me with pity. That was important. I had refused to be a victim. I had refused to be pitied. I want you all to know that this isn't about revenge, I said, my voice resonating with a final, powerful clarity. This is about truth. This is about refusing to build a life on someone else's lies. And this is about choosing myself over people who chose each other over me. With that, I turned my back on the altar. I turned my back on Nathaniel, who stood frozen, a pariah in his own wedding tuxedo. I turned my back on Pastor Jenkins, who looked like he wished the stone floor would open up and swallow him whole. I began to walk back down the aisle, my long cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe. I held my head high, my gaze fixed on the great doors at the far end of the sanctuary, the path to my freedom. As I passed the front row, I stopped in front of my father. I leaned down and kissed his cheek. His skin was cold and damp with tears. "Dad," I whispered, so only he could hear. "I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I'm not sorry that you learned it." He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears, but they were tears of pride, not shame. "I love you, sweetheart," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing, the brave thing." I squeezed his shoulder. Then I continued my walk. Behind me, chaos was finally erupting. I could hear Judge Reed's voice, low and furious, tearing into his son. "You have dishonored our family name. You are no longer my son." I heard Victoria Reed let out a small, wounded cry. I heard the frantic, high-pitched voice of the wedding coordinator trying to restore some semblance of order to a situation that was beyond repair. Guests were standing up, whispering loudly, pointing. My mother was still sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Chin from the flower committee stared at her with an expression of undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. Not once. I walked through those towering cathedral doors, out of the sacred space that had been desecrated by lies, and into the bright, clean light of the autumn afternoon. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the life I was leaving behind. The parking lot behind the Washington National Cathedral became my sanctuary. I stood beside my car, breathing in the crisp October air, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of the dress, the weight of the lies, the weight of a future I never truly wanted, it all seemed to lift from my shoulders. The sounds of chaos from inside the cathedral drifted through the heavy wooden doors, raised voices, crying, the scraping of chairs as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. My phone, tucked inside my small bridal clutch, was already buzzing relentlessly with calls and texts. My mother, Nathaniel, his mother, my bridesmaids. I ignored them all, except for one that came through a few minutes later. It was Priya. I answered, my voice surprisingly steady. "Tell me you got it." "Holy Celeste. Holy actual hell." Her voice was a mix of awe and adrenaline. Did I really just witness that? I got it all. Every single second. My editor is going to lose his mind when he sees this footage. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. "Good," I said simply. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softening with concern. "I mean, really okay. Where are you?" I considered the question. Standing there in my magnificent, pointless wedding dress in an empty parking lot. having just publicly destroyed 2 lives and detonated my own. A strange sense of peace washed over me. It was the calm that follows a devastating storm. The world was in ruins, but I was still standing. "I'm in the back lot," I said. "And Priya? I think I'm perfect." Within the hour, the story was spreading like wildfire through our social circles. Priya, true to her word, had uploaded a tastefully edited clip-me speech. The reactions. My final walk to her news outlet's website. It was accompanied by a short article she had written on the fly. A masterpiece of factual reporting tinged with righteous indignation. Within 3 hours, it was on local news websites, with headlines like "Bridal Bombshell at National Cathedral" and "Jilted Bride Exposes Affair at Altar." Within 6 hours, the hashtag Altar of Truth was trending on social media. People were sharing Priya's video, dissecting every moment of my cathedral confrontation, and overwhelmingly siding with me. The reactions were everything I'd hoped for and more. By late afternoon, Judge Reed had issued a formal statement through his law firm's PR department. It was curt and brutal. It announced that his son, Nathaniel Reed, was taking an indefinite leave of absence to address pressing personal matters. It was corporate speak for career suicide. No reputable law firm in D.C. would touch him after a public scandal of this magnitude. His name was now synonymous with dishonor. Victoria Reed, Nathaniel's mother, sent a handwritten letter that arrived by courier to my parents' home that same evening. My father, having left my mother at the cathedral, read it to me over the phone. "Dear Celeste," the letter began. An elegant, sloping script. "I cannot begin to express my horror at my son's behavior or my admiration for your courage today. You deserved so much better than this betrayal. Please know that you will always have my respect and support. With deepest regrets, Victoria." The congregation of my father's church, St. Michael's, rallied around him in a way that brought fresh tears to my eyes. By Sunday evening, our home phone's voicemail was full of messages of support. People dropped off casseroles and pies on the front porch, the traditional currency of comfort in times of crisis. They were expressing their disgust at what had been done not just to me, but to our family, and especially to their beloved pastor. But the most satisfying response came from my mother's carefully curated social circle. The women she had spent years trying to impress with her perfect marriage, her perfect home, and her perfect daughter. Within 24 hours, she'd been quietly asked to step down from her position on the boards of 3 different local charities. Her lunch invitations dried up. Her phone stopped ringing. Diana Darren, who had built her entire identity on being the perfect pastor's wife and a pillar of the community, suddenly found herself a pariah, the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went. She had craved attention, and now she had it, just not the kind she had wanted. She tried to call me dozens of times. So did Nathaniel. I let every call go to voicemail. The sound of their desperate, pleading voices a distant, meaningless noise. I had nothing left to say to them. I had set it all on the altar, in front of God and everyone. 3 days after my non-wedding, I sat in my father's study, a room that had always been a sanctuary of peace and intellect. Now, it was a room of quiet upheaval. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, and the shelves, once groaning under the weight of theological treatises and classic literature, were beginning to look bare. I was carefully wrapping his antique collection of sermon notes in tissue paper while he packed his books. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was a shared, somber quiet, the kind that settles after a great battle. "You don't have to resign, Dad," I said for what felt like the dozenth time. "The congregation loves you. They're on your side." "Yes, I do," he said, his voice tired but resolute. He didn't look up from the box he was filling. "I can't stand at that pulpit every Sunday and preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it right under my roof. The congregation deserves a leader whose life isn't a lie. He had aged 10 years in the past 72 hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped. But there was something else in his posture, too. A strange kind of peace, like a man who'd been carrying a heavy, invisible weight for years and hadn't realized it until it was finally lifted. "What will you do?" I asked, placing a wrapped bundle of notes into a box labeled Sermons 1990 to 2000. "I've been offered a position at a small church up in Vermont," he said. "Interim pastor, while they search for someone permanent. A friend of a friend from the seminary runs it. It'll be quiet. It'll give me time to figure out what comes next." He paused, taping a box shut with slow, deliberate movements. "It'll give me time to heal." "And Mom?" I asked, the word feeling like a foreign object in my mouth. His face hardened, the soft lines of the pastor disappearing and replaced by the firm set of a man who had made an irrevocable decision. "Your mother has made her choices. She can live with the consequences." Through the study window, I could see Diana's silver Mercedes parked in the driveway. She was loading suitcases into the trunk. She was moving in with her sister in Baltimore, the only family member who would still speak to her. I had watched from the window as she moved about the lawn she had so meticulously cared for. Her movements jerky and defeated. She looked small and lost. For a fleeting moment, a pang of something, not pity, but a ghost of the love I once had for her stirred in my chest. Quickly pushed it away. "Have you talked to her at all?" I asked. "Once," he said, not meeting my eyes. "To tell her my lawyer would be in touch. I filed for divorce." The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. In our family. In our community. That word had been unthinkable. My parents had been married for 31 years. They had built their entire lives around the idea of until death do us part. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were clear. "You didn't just save yourself, Celeste. You saved me from living the rest of my life as a fool. I would have gone to my grave never knowing who I was really married to." A knock at the front door interrupted us. My father went to answer it while I continued packing his books. The familiar scent of old paper a small comfort. I could hear low, somber voices in the hallway. Then footsteps approaching the study. "Celeste." Dad appeared in the doorway. Behind him stood Judge Harrison Reed. Nathaniel's father looked as though he'd aged as much as my own. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and shame. "Judge Reed," I said, standing up and smoothing down my jeans. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I kept my voice even. "I'm surprised to see you." "I needed to come in person," he said simply, his voice raspy. "To apologize. For my son. For what he put you through. For what he put both our families through." I studied his face, looking for any sign of blame or resentment toward me for the public humiliation. I found only genuine, profound remorse. "Thank you," I said quietly. "But you're not responsible for Nathaniel's choices." "Aren't I?" His laugh was a short, bitter sound. I raised him to believe he was entitled to whatever he wanted, that his charm and our family name would get him out of any trouble. "I created the man who betrayed you." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with my own conviction. "You raised a son. He chose to become a man without honor. That's on him, not you." Judge Reed nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "Victoria and we're trying to figure out where we went wrong, how we failed him so completely." "Don't let his failures define your marriage," I said, glancing at my own father, who stood silently by the door. "Some people are just broken inside. It doesn't mean everyone who loved them is broken, too." He studied me for a long moment, a look of weary admiration in his eyes. "You're a remarkable young woman, Celeste. You know that?" Most people would be destroyed by what happened to you. Instead, you're standing here, offering wisdom to a foolish old man. I learned from the best, I said, my gaze shifting to my father. After Judge Reed left, Dad and I finished packing in a comfortable, healing silence. As the sun began to set, painting his study in shades of gold and amber, he closed the last box and looked around the room that had been his sanctuary for over a decade. Any regrets? I asked softly. About the divorce? About leaving? He was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the now empty driveway where my mother's car had been. No, he said finally. He turned to me, a small, sad smile on his face. About raising a daughter brave enough to choose truth over comfort? Never. 6 months later, I stood on the small balcony of my new apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, watching spring emerge from winter's grip. Cherry blossoms dotted the landscape like pink confetti, and the air smelled of fresh grass and new beginnings. My life was finally my own, a blank page I was slowly, carefully filling in. My phone rang. It was my father's weekly check-in call. How's Vermont? I asked without preamble. Beautiful, he said, his voice sounding lighter than it had in years. Peaceful. The congregation here is small but genuine. No politics. No social climbing. Just faith and community. Are you happy, Dad? I'm getting there, he said honestly. What about you? How's the new job? 3 months ago, I had quit my job at Meridian. The office was filled with too many memories, too many pitying glances. I'd accepted a position as a senior editor at a prestigious publishing house in New York City. The salary was substantial. The work was challenging. And best of all, it was 225 miles away from the wreckage of my old life. I commuted a couple of days a week for now, but I was planning to move there full-time in the summer. I love it, I said, and I meant it. The city, the work, the anonymity. I can walk down the street and just be Celeste, not that woman from the wedding video. Good, he said, a world of relief in that single word. You deserve a fresh start. The wedding video had eventually faded from viral status, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama, as is the way of the internet. But for several weeks, I'd been its darling, the woman who chose dignity over silence. The attention had been overwhelming, but ultimately, it had been empowering. I had received thousands of messages, mostly from women, sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking me for showing them that it was possible to choose themselves. Have you heard from her? Dad asked, his weekly, hesitant question. No, I said, and I haven't reached out. Diana had tried to get to me through intermediaries, me and old family friends, even my former boss. But I had made it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals were too profound for easy forgiveness. Maybe someday, years from now, conversation could be had. But not today. Not yet. What about Nathaniel? His attorney contacted mine last month, I said, a small, humorless laugh escaping me. Apparently, he's in some intensive therapy program and wants to make amends. What did you say? I told my lawyer to inform him that the best amends he could make would be to stay out of my life forever. After the call ended, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee and my latest manuscript. It was a memoir by a woman who had rebuilt her life after discovering her husband of 20 years was living a double life. The parallels to my own story weren't lost on me, but I'd learned to find strength in other people's survival stories rather than pain in their betrayals. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reading. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found a delivery man holding a massive, glorious bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, black-eyed Susans, lavender, and Queen Anne's lace. The kind I had wanted for my wedding bouquet instead of my mother's choice of white roses and peonies. The card was simple. The handwriting unfamiliar. It read, "For choosing yourself. From a friend who understands." There was no signature. No return address. But I didn't need one. Over the past few months, a strange and beautiful thing had happened. I had connected online with dozens of other women who had seen my story, women who had found the courage to leave toxic relationships, to speak truth to power, to choose their own happiness over other people's comfort. We were a quiet, informal sisterhood of survivors, and we looked out for each other. This was, I knew, from one of them. I arranged the wildflowers in a tall glass vase and placed them on my kitchen table, where their wild, natural beauty brightened the entire room. Then I returned to my balcony, to my manuscript, to the life I was building for myself. One deliberate, truthful choice at a time. 1 year to the day after I had stood at the altar of the Washington National Cathedral, I stood at a different kind of altar, a podium in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel in New York City. I looked out at a sea of hundreds of faces, writers, publishers, agents, and readers who had gathered for the National Women's Literature Conference. The nameplate in front of me read, Celeste Darren, keynote speaker. The power of an authentic voice. A year ago, I began, my voice carrying easily through the ballroom's sound system, clear and confident. I stood at an altar in front of 200 people and made a choice. It wasn't the choice everyone expected me to make. It wasn't the choice that would lead to a life of quiet comfort and societal approval. It was the choice that honored who I really was and what I knew to be true. In the audience, I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats, their faces intent. My story, in a way I had never anticipated, had become a touchstone for many, not because of the salacious drama or the satisfying revenge, but because of the deeper, more universal truth it represented. We are taught from childhood, especially as women, I continued, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity. That being nice is more valuable than being honest. That other people's comfort matters more than our own truth. We are taught to swallow our words, to smooth things over, to carry the weight of other people's betrayals in silence, lest we make a scene. I paused, thinking of that morning in the hotel room when I had looked at myself in the mirror and decided to become someone new, or rather, to become the person I was always meant to be. But here's what I learned in the wreckage of a life I thought I wanted. When you choose truth over comfort, when you choose yourself over people who have chosen to betray you, you don't just change your own life. You don't just reclaim your own story. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. Your voice becomes a chorus. The applause, when it came, was warm and sustained. It wasn't just for me. It was for the idea, for the collective strength in the room. After my speech, dozens of women approached me. They didn't want to talk about the gossip or the details of the affair. They wanted to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence, authenticity over approval. A woman who had finally left an emotionally abusive husband. An executive who had blown the whistle on her company's corruption. A young writer who had refused to change her story's controversial ending to please a publisher. We were all speaking the same language. The language of truth. Late that night, I sat in my quiet hotel room with a glass of wine, scrolling through messages on social media from women who had watched my conference speech online. Their words were variations on the same theme. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dad. Watched your speech online. Your grandmother would be so proud. I stared at the message for a long time, a lump forming in my throat. He meant my father's mother. Of course. The strong, no-nonsense woman whose veil I had worn on my non-wedding day. The woman who had taught me that strength could look like grace. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. But a small part of me wondered if, in some way, he also meant Diana. I wondered if somewhere in Baltimore, living with the quiet, lonely consequences of her choices. My mother had watched her daughter speak about courage and felt something other than regret. Maybe, just maybe, there was a flicker of pride. I would probably never know for sure. And for the first time, I realized I was okay with that. Her validation was no longer a currency I needed. I had heard through the family grapevine that she was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. That Nathaniel, after months of therapy and a failed attempt to start a consulting business, was now living in a small apartment in a different state. His name and reputation irrevocably tarnished. Their affair had crumbled under the weight of the public exposure, just as I knew it would. Theirs was a love born in shadows, and it couldn't survive in the light. Their punishment wasn't a single, dramatic event. It was the slow, grinding reality of living every day with the choices they had made. Outside my hotel window, New York City sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in that brilliant maze of lights were millions of people, all making choices. Some brave, some cowardly, some that would change everything, some that would change nothing. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast. A toast to all of them, but especially to the ones who would choose themselves when the world told them to choose silence. The ones who would speak truth when speaking lies would be easier. The ones who would walk away from beautiful prisons disguised as happily ever afters. Here's to the ones who choose freedom. I whispered to my reflection in the dark glass. Even when freedom looks like standing alone. I finished my wine, closed my laptop, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, I would fly back to my life in my own apartment, with my challenging job that I loved, and my garden that would soon be filled with wildflowers. A life I had built not on someone else's crumbling foundation, but on my own unshakable truth. And if that wasn't a happily ever after, it was something even better. It was a beginning that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not the destruction you cause, but the beautiful, strong life you build in the ashes of what you've burned down. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is find her own voice and refuse to be silenced. And sometimes, the best happily ever after is not the one you planned, but the one you create for yourself when you finally learn to value your own truth above everyone else's comfort. It is the quiet, steady, and profound happiness of being, finally and completely, free.